A very good morning and afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our webinar, The Asia Payroll Landscape, Connecting Payroll Outsourcing with Business Outcome. Before I introduce the speakers, just a few housekeeping rules. You will be placed on mute. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, you can type into the chat box and it will be answered later. So now, let me introduce the speakers for today. We have Ina Wobert, Ascender General Manager of Asia Services, and a really special guest, Neil Thompson, Ascender's Chief Financial Officer with us today. Ina and Neil, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi, good morning, good afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining. It really is lovely to be here, and I hope we'll have a good, fun session ahead of us. Neil, it's lovely to have you. How are things down under?
It's good to see you as well, Ina, and welcome to everybody on the webinar. Yes, I'm here in the office in Sydney. We've actually started to bring some people back into the office, which is very pleasing.
Alrighty, I guess we better get started and take a quick look at the agenda today so that you know whether you're in the right session. I guess to start off, the agenda for today roughly is we will introduce not just ourselves as we've just done, but also the company a little bit so you know in what context we're talking to you. We'll walk you through some of the aspects of the sort of complexity of payroll and APAC in general. And then we'll talk about how organizations typically are reliant on people, process, and technology to make anything work. We will talk about business continuity planning, which is something that everyone has somewhat top of mind right at the moment. And then finally also what we feel, somewhat biased that you should look for in an outsourcing vendor when you go to market for payroll outsourcing. So that's roughly the agenda today, and we'll try to keep it some conversational light. And of course, we have Q&A at the end, so hopefully you'll get a lot out of today's session as well. So let's start a little bit with who Ascender is. So we're obviously the leading payroll and HCM software and solution provider in the APAC region. We've got well over 900 employees, in 8 countries throughout APAC. And we service well over 30 countries as well in the region. And we are an integrated HR and payroll software and outsourced services provider. Our clients are typically something in the size of mid-market to large enterprise in scale, so not the very small, but anything above that, I guess. And I think what's sort of interesting to keep in mind is that we also own our own IP. So all the software that we use to deliver our service solutions is owned by us, which means that we've got control end to end of the full service that we provide. But I guess more interestingly, if you go to the next slide, what are we all about? So our purpose is to support our clients to put their people first and to unlock the full potential of the workforce. And I already talked about the fact that we do this by developing and delivering HR and payroll software and services across APAC. So APAC is our home, and this is where we operate, and we don't go much beyond that. Our driving values is that we start with the people. We put our people first, and we understand that there's more than an input to a business. They really are the business that we do, and that we are in very much a service industry, as we were. And from that follows quite naturally that we are very client focused as well. So great relationships are the sort of source of our success. And sort of last but definitely not least, in the industry that we're in, once again, integrity is fundamental to what we do. And so we need to make sure that we always do the right thing, even when no one's watching. And those are the sort of 3 pillars or 3 driving values that we operate by. And hopefully that's something that at least the clients who are on the call today will recognize and resonate with them as well. So moving right along, I think, Neil, I guess maybe hearing from you a little bit from one end of the space that we operate in, what is it in your mind that makes APAC as a geography so complex, and what are the types of things that people often don't think about when they talk about APAC?
Yeah, thanks very much, Ina. If we just flick through to the next slide. We've got a couple of statistics here, and really not telling people on the call anything they don't know, in a way that APAC really is the largest part of the globe by population. It is not only the largest part of the global economy, but I think more importantly, it's the fastest growing, has been for quite some time, and with that comes complexity. As we can see in some of the boxes there, it's a very diverse region. far more so than other sort of economic blocks across the globe. And with that comes additional complexity when you combine that with the rate of growth and the developing infrastructure around some countries in the region. Those regulatory environments are developing very quickly. They need constant monitoring, and that provides a challenge across all parts of the economy, but certainly none more so than in payroll, in terms of being able to accurately pay our people, which is, as mentioned before, people are at the core of what we do, and at the core of really what all organisations are about. And that mission critical role in terms of payroll, whether it's insourced or outsourced, needs to be accurate time and time again. And certainly in this particular part of the world, it's probably a little more challenging than others. As Ina mentioned before, this is our home. This is where we play. We believe we have the capabilities to manage that properly. Maybe there's, I think the next slide, there's a little more detail around some of the challenges in the APAC region.
Sorry, Diane, can you just go back one more? So here, I think if you talk about, that's right, Neil, and I think thanks for that. But I think the other thing is that, of course, you've got the whole sort of environment that you operate in that makes things complex, but then you also have the internal organizational complexity that basically comes into play as well, the things that you need to manage within your own organization. And some of the potential challenges that we typically see, in addition to just the whole ecosystem around you, are sort of, how do you deal with those constant changes in let's say, legislation and taxes that are very sort of diverse? And I'll dive into that a little bit in the next slide. But you've also got, typically in your organization, if you are a multinational organization, you typically have multiple legacy systems, multiple manual processes that need to be covered. You've got, somebody coming to you saying, shouldn't we be automating? Why don't we have bots in the organization? You've got all kinds of things that you have to deal with also as an internal function. So I guess if we deep dive into, on the next slide, into just what we've seen purely in sort of statutory changes, and this is between January and June this calendar year, we've got a legislative research team that actually does sort of dive into the various markets that we operate in as a full-time job, and there's multiple people spending their days just looking into what all these different governments come up with to make our lives more interesting. We've clocked 276 various legal changes in our market that impact payroll or HR year to date, and we're sort of halfway there. And 85 of these are now special flavors. They're COVID-related changes, so various sort of government actions to make life more manageable. And as you would all know, all these changes typically impact both systems and processes and people. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But part of our work is to make sure that the systems and processes and people we have in place stay compliant. And that is, as I said, a full-time job for several people within our organization. So I think some of the challenges for organizations that try to do this in-house become very tangible and real when you position them like this. Of course, as we would typically expect, I mean, Australia has led the way so far this year in terms of the number and volume of changes, and that has partially to do with the fact that they also introduced some other legislation and not just changes related to COVID that was quite sort of invasive. And then we've got Philippines following, which is also quite typical. And I think it's fair to say, I guess, that in our market, which is sort of has different types of countries, the lead time that's sometimes provided by some geographies is quite short to react to these legal changes as well. So, and some other markets maybe provide you with a lot more time to reflect and react as well. So I think that's sort of a bit of the fun of what APAC is for us, I guess, and a little bit of a practical detail to consider in this market, which I think, especially in global multinational organizations, is often overlooked. Like APAC is considered like a fairly relatively simple market to operate in, which we always try to sort of counter with, yeah, kind of, but not really. Anyway, we sort of move right along, I guess. Neil, maybe you can talk a little bit more about what you see in terms of the regulatory changes that drives making payroll more visible, because there's a lot happening, especially in Australia, I think, in this space.
Certainly, I think I'll just pick up on one thing you mentioned around obviously changes with the current COVID pandemic, and certainly one of the major changes here in Australia was the introduction of sort of wage subsidy legislation, which was announced towards the end of March, and within a week we had to update all our systems, rewrite the code to actually take account of what was a very significant change here in Australia, and have that deployed across more than 1 million employees that we pay here in Australia. So we have the capability of doing that across the region through dint of having control over our own systems. As Ina mentioned before, these are systems that are owned by Ascender, that we've built up over many years. We were able to take that action very quickly to make sure that our clients were compliant all the way through that change. We've highlighted here on the slide just a range of various headlines across the region, and there's no doubt that the complexity of payroll and the requirement to get it accurate, whilst it's complex, that's not an excuse for not getting it correct. And certainly there have been a number of very high-profile cases here in Australia, also in New Zealand and in Singapore of late, where companies have got into trouble through not managing the complexity of their payroll well enough, and there has been underpayment of employees. In some circumstances, this underpayment has gone back decades, and there's certainly a swell of legislation and political weight behind getting payroll correct. And certainly one thing we're discovering across the various countries in which we operate, that this is becoming a more high-profile thing for boards of companies to look at. We're certainly getting queries from time to time from existing customers about coming in and doing a review of their payroll to ensure that they are paying their employees correctly. And certainly it is something that if it's not on your risk register, it probably should be. Because I think we will experience over the coming years even more closer scrutiny of payroll across the region. And as I say, complexity is no excuse for not getting it right. And certainly fines and penalties are only going to become more severe as time goes on. And certainly with underpayment of wages, that certainly has a significant impact on the employee base. We've certainly seen it in certain high-profile cases in Australia where large organisations have come forward and admitted underpayment, but that has a very negative impact on the employee base, which is obviously something that we all wish to avoid. So Ina, maybe just on to the next slide.
That's actually a great segue. Yeah, that's a great segue actually to what I was going to say in the next slide, which is that, you know, we've been talking a lot about the fact that the payroll needs to be compliant. We need to get it right. There's a lot of legislation around it. I think this is sort of the core of our business. Now, for you, maybe sitting in an organization where payroll isn't actually core of your business, this certainly is not just about compliance and regulation. It's really like getting pay right is fundamental to employee engagement. So it's really that very basic level that you set, and the basic expectation with your employees is getting their pay right. And there's no way that you can credibly start discussing employee engagement and, you know, employee experience and all these things without actually having your fundamental level of getting the pay right. Your credibility just won't be there. So I think that, you know, all of the research that we have in the market and in the industry validates the link between getting first of all your pay right and employee engagement, and finally employee engagement ties directly in with business performance. So this should be really, I think, in our opinion, on top of mind, and we'd like to obviously be there to help you in the space where, you know, you can focus on the rest of the engagement bit, which is pretty hard to outsource compared to a process like payroll, which is fairly industrialized, to be honest. So actually, if you go to the next slide, please, Darren. From our point of view, the market trends that we see as well since many years already just reinforce the fact that we think payroll is going to continue to stay high on the agenda of organizations and decision makers. And one of the drivers here is the fact that organizations tend to try to simplify their landscape in terms of the number of vendors that they engage with, the number of systems that they maintain, and so on. So they're consolidating their portfolios and trying to optimize the number of vendors. which I think is sort of countered by the fact that in reality, the challenge is that payroll ultimately is very local. So as much as you want to standardize, you're going to come to a point where you say yes, but then actually, like, Asia is not a country. And you really have to try to understand that payroll is run differently in all these other countries, even if they're next to each other. That combined with, I guess, a lot of focus right at the moment on BCP and how to ensure that you can continue to pay your people is something. And then finally, I think the current sort of uncertainty that drives a need to be agile. Neil was explaining about the JobKeeper scheme and the need for companies to quickly turn around and make that reality for their employees. So is there anything, Neil, you want to add, or does that sort of cover it?
I think that does cover it very well, Ina, but certainly it is something that all people involved in payroll, as with most other functions across organisations, need to be ever vigilant of the changing landscape and being on top of it. And well, I'd like to talk a bit about that, probably through the idea of people, process and technology. If we could go ahead a couple of slides, thanks, Darren. And this is not rocket science, but we truly believe that in all organisational endeavours, it starts with having the right people, and certainly that is never more critical than in the current circumstances we find ourselves. It starts with people. Having the right people is critical. Without those right people, you cannot manage your processes well enough. But processes need to be in place and managed well. They will provide the ability for accuracy and consistency. And underpinning all that, certainly within the payroll framework, is having appropriate technology underpinning all of that. Maybe if I could just expand a little bit further, if we go to the next slide. Certainly in terms of people, same with payroll as with the organisations in which we all find ourselves. They are the key to successful organisations, and not only attracting but retaining key talent is never more critical than it is today. We certainly see that in our own operations, and we see it across our range of our clients' organisations, that retention is absolutely critical, and certainly managing the life cycle of employees is now more critical than ever. Having those teams being able to function properly across functions is also becoming more and more critical with the evolution of new technologies. We certainly see the ability to interact, and once again, challenging now with a lot of people working from home. How do we keep that engagement level up and that interaction between employees at the level it needs to be is also something that certainly occupies my mind, and I suspect most people on the call today. And making that investment in people, obviously not just attracting and retaining, but developing talent through the life cycle of employees is also absolutely critical. If I quickly turn to processes, certainly in the world in which we operate, where it is, as Ina alluded to earlier, there are a degree of repetitive processes required within payroll, but it's absolutely critical to have those processes well defined and controlled to ensure accuracy and compliance, which are absolutely critical in the world we live in. But also beyond that, it's those edge cases and those non-repetitive tasks that are also critical, and having the right people and processes in place to enable you to deal with those edge cases. We're finding as payroll becomes more and more complex, there are more and more legislative changes, a higher degree of focus on compliance. Dealing with those edge cases is ever more important, and having those right processes in place will ensure that we can be compliant in everything we do. Underpinning all of that is technology. If I could just have the next slide, thanks. And really what technology allows us to do is to become more efficient in these tasks that we are tasked with. It enables appropriate integrations with other systems through back-end systems, through finance and IT. And also as we develop the technology platforms that we use, we're able to evolve the automation of those processes. which provides even greater control and compliance. It also provides, I think very importantly, as we tend to now work a lot more from home environments, it provides that flexibility to be able to work in remote locations, be it for the short term or the long term, but also ensuring all the compliance and security checks that are critical, particularly in the world of payroll, to still be adhered to. So in summary, starts with people. Having the right processes is absolutely critical for that to maintain accuracy in all that we do, and compliance, underpinned by technology, which provides the efficiency gains that we believe can be achieved through outsourcing. So that's my trilogy of people, process, and technology. And how does that tie into BCP? So I might hand back to Inna just to talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Neil. Look, I think we spoke about earlier, and if you just go into, we're going to share a little bit, I guess, of our experience, given that that's always the best thing to do rather than talk about theory. But before we go there, I think maybe if you go to the next slide, please, Darren. We did have a survey that was done fairly recently that showed that there were a fair bit of organizations that didn't, I guess, have the level of preparation into business continuity planning that they may have hoped to have. So at least in retrospect, so we saw, you know, back in 100 years ago, before this pandemic started, I guess, as it feels, that there were organizations that didn't have a BCP at all in place. There were organizations that had a plan, but they weren't quite confident, and there were the organizations that did. Now, I think we discussed this a few times already, Neil, in the past, but in reality, basically everyone in the world is now enacted some sort of BCP. So I guess if they weren't ready, they've still made it work somehow. But, you know, maybe a little bit more about that experience and what the challenge is now.
Yeah, certainly. You know, I think, you know, when I looked at this slide initially, I said, yes, actually everybody has enacted a BCP plan, really across the globe. They've had to, and necessity being the mother of invention, people have been able to continue to operate in these very difficult circumstances. The question for me, as I sort of look forward to over the sort of medium term, is as the duration extends, how robust and resilient are our BCP plans in terms of the length of time that it's going to take to revert back to BAU, whatever that looks like, but almost more fundamentally, the impact that this is having on all our people. Certainly we're seeing as the ebb and flow of the pandemic hits people, we start to free up the economy, then it gets clamped down again. It's certainly having a significant impact on people, and all BCP plans must now look at the impact the BC plan itself is having on their people. And I think BCP plans need to be live, they need to be organic, and they will continue to develop as we go through the coming months. Now, Anna, I think we have a video to show, a quick video to show.
Yeah, that's right. It's about business continuity. And for us as a vendor of really critical services, it is important for us to be able to assure our clients that we've got their back in the event that something unusual happens. A lot of organizations have plans in place where they say, well, in the event of, let's say, some kind of a hurricane or earthquake or anything like that, these are the measures that we will take to ensure that we can continue to serve you without disruption. We assess those risks as well and say, how likely is it that we're going to have an event that will actually take out, for example, an entire piece of our workforce, and what would be the impact on our clients. So this is all part of what organizations typically do. However, I think also most organizations have an experience of testing these BCP plans out as a paper-based exercise. So usually you call it something like a tabletop exercise, where you walk through the different steps in your BCP plan and you say, do we have this? Is this working? Are we confident that this is going to happen in this way? And as you know, even if you have a great plan, then reality has a very unique way of putting a spin on things. So, of course, the events that we've experienced currently have evolved at a really rapid pace. So I think what we've seen is we've seen sort of countries and regions, I guess, operate in that very sort of normal way for months on end, while people are sort of observing events unfolding. And then suddenly, within the span of a couple of days or a week, the country can go from that to a complete shutdown, which means that some of the instances and organizations in that country don't always have time to follow suit. So in some of the economies that we operate in, for example, we've got a full shutdown of the market at the moment, but at the same time we've got government organizations not extending critical deadlines for deliverables, which makes it a little bit difficult for an organization to operate. These are things where, once again, like the way that you work and the way that you operate with your clients will be really important. So transparency, again, towards your clients as well as towards your internal workforce about what it is that you're going to be able to do is fundamental. We need to go out to the clients and we need to tell them that we have a problem, and it's a shared problem. It's not something that we wanted to introduce, but it's also not something that we can solve, unfortunately. And then the clients usually are quite forthcoming if you're transparent with them, because they understand that they don't have any magic around these types of situations either. And similarly, the employees, I mean, we didn't have necessarily the ideal equipment to share to every employee that we had in the organization. Some of our teams, like the one in China, they've been working at home for months and months using their personal equipment and having their kids at home, and the network speed is not ideal at all times. But we've all pushed through it, and we've all done it with and we've gotten great feedback from our clients actually about it, which we're really grateful for, that they take the time in these types of circumstances to write and thank us for the way that we support them. And we obviously take pride in doing that, and we need to keep doing it, of course, but still, whenever somebody stops and says thank you, it does warm the heart and make you want to do even better. Thanks, Darren. So while we go back to the slides, I must say, so this video was recorded a few months ago already, and I feel like I possibly also, again, 100 years ago at the same time. It certainly doesn't feel like yesterday, but I think what we set out to do. So look, of course, we hadn't anticipated anything like this happening, and neither had anyone else in the world. And so what did we sort of set up as a leadership team, or with people in 8 countries, and with this pandemic, I guess, evolving at very different rates across the world. What did we set out to achieve? So we wanted to set some, I guess, priorities for decision making on the highest possible level, so that we have a bit of a guiding light for our very difficult conversations, to be honest, at some stage. And some of the priorities that we had were sort of self-evidently were to put our people and their safety first. So make the decisions that we make on the basis that we want to ensure that our staff is safe and well looked after, which meant that we adopted ultimately a two-phased approach, where in some markets we essentially told part of the workforce who already had laptops to already start working from home, whilst the staff that didn't have laptops could still continue to be in the office, which reduced the risk to contagion at that stage somewhat, although it wasn't ideal. So the other priority, as evidently, would be that we needed to make sure that we can stick to our client commitments, and we needed to identify very quickly if there were situations in which we would not be able to for some reason, because, like I explained in that video, because of, for example, enforced shutdowns and lockdowns in a market where you have to deliver statutory paperwork actually as physical paper. If you can't move outside of your house, then how are you going to deliver these documents? So, you know, there were examples like this that we had to deal with and work with our clients to resolve. Then for the markets where we continued to keep the offices open, or where we reopened them, we needed to ensure the working environment is safe as possible. So I think here in Singapore, you'll see that the government has taken a lot of steps to mandate and prescribe what organizations are to do, but it's not always the case in this region. So we had to, I guess, come up with our own guidelines as well, and say these are the types of things that a sender, as an organization, wants to have in the offices to make sure that the offices are as safe for everyone, regardless of the physical location. And then, yeah, I guess sort of redesigning some of the processes that we work for, so business as unusual. So when you work from home, like, how do you make sure? And this is really about, I think we'll touch on it, about that whole keeping the teams engaged as well. So especially with the team members who had always worked near their colleagues, this has been a huge transition, and I think there's been a bit of humor around this as well, where the digitization of the organization wasn't something that you got a consultant to come in to do. It was introduced to you by the COVID pandemic. So in one way or another, people have sort of found their feet and managed to deal with conf calls and Teams calls and things, and that's been something that we needed to incorporate into our processes and planning as well. And of course, in terms of our, our obligations contractually towards our clients, I think they would say, look, we get some flexibility by declaring the fact that we're in BCP, but we don't get absolute carte blanche, or we can't just go ahead and just fail on every possible level just because it's BCP, and that's not something that we would set out to do anyway. Maybe just on the next slide, just a bit of a reminder of the timeline as it relates, and I just sort of touch on this because I think everyone's lived through it. I think in this timeline, right, what you would sort of see, if you can read the small print, is that we were quite quick at Ascender to react to the pandemic, actually, and this is, I think, part of being, distributed across multiple countries in the region. So I recall being, in fact, in Sydney in our ELT meeting and looking at the evolving situation in China, and we were sort of we were making some early calls right then and there about the fact that after the Chinese New Year holiday, we would ask the team not to return to the office, and we would ask them to work from home. And then quite quickly thereafter, we started returning home to Singapore. For me, it was a quick decision on our side as well, and a quick phone call to say, look, let's also make sure that the Singapore team starts to work from home right away, because we also introduced our sort of heightened risk level here. And then we did quite quick decisions thereafter as well. In some of the other markets, as the situation evolved, we were often quite early, and I think our staff felt that we were early to move to say to them that we want you to stay at home and stay safe, which I think they've appreciated, and I think in retrospect it's been the right decision to make, but we weren't sure at the time, right? That wasn't evident. We had a lot of debate about it, I remember, Neil. Well, that being said, now we're in August now, and we see, like you said, the ebb and flow of the pandemic, and our colleagues in Melbourne are feeling it, and I'm sure some of our colleagues in New Zealand as well. So sort of looking at the sort of, as much as I don't like the phrase, the new normal, I think we really have to start solving for the real problems here, which is, I guess, but before we go there, I think we'll see, and we'll look at another video, because, you shouldn't really take my word for it. We've also asked some of the colleagues in the different offices to chime in and talk about how they experience the event. So maybe, Darren, if you can go to that video next, please.
The pandemic occurred right before our Chinese New Year. At first, I didn't think it was a big deal. I could still go back to the office, and my kid could still go back to the kindergarten after the holiday. But later, things got worse. More and more people were tested positive all over the country, and one of our cities, Wuhan, was locked down.
Thankfully, I can say that I've adjusted to the new normal. We now have an office space here in our home to ensure that we're able to work efficiently and effectively.
It is something that I'm proud of, because in this way we were able to protect ourselves, our families, and prioritize the health and safety of every employees. It is also Ascender's way of giving us an assurance that work will still continue. Weeks before the actual announcement coming from the government of letting people work from home, the leadership team is already a step ahead in making sure not just employees are well taken care, but more importantly, work is on a business as usual state while people are working from home.
The only drawback is that the speed of the network is not good when we started to work at BCP. In order to solve this problem, company provided us with pockets of Wi-Fi to improve the efficiency of my home office, and ensured that I could process payroll and reply clients' emails in time. Also, company formulates shift and flexible work arrangements to avoid encountering many people on the way to work when Shanghai situation is getting better. I also got the mask and alcohol from Ascender at the same time to reduce the risk of the COVID-19 infections.
And I guess thanks for that. I guess the thing now is, and if you go to the next slide, I think if we look at some of the other decisions we did, first of all, is that we did decide quite early on that we would be proactive in how we support our clients. So we've made all the information that was given to us, as well as the status of which offices were on BCP and so on, available publicly. So whether you're a client or not, you could find them on our webpage. So we decided this was part of the sort of community service, if you will, that we were able to provide. And then, as we really wanted to take some of the burden off our clients. So this is the job that we've been paid to do. So let's just make sure that we continue to do that job as well as possible, so that we can let our clients focus on their people and their processes and making sure that their business continues to run. And I think that we are quite proud and happy to say that we managed to get that happening. So, what we did really resonated with the clients. We got sometimes even unexpected good feedback to say that, look, this is something like the level of communication that you provide to us, the level of assurance that you've been able to give us about everything continuing has been something that we haven't seen with other vendors, and that's obviously always pleasing. And we're quite happy that that's been how it was felt, because that's really what we also set out to do, is to say, look, let's make sure that we do our bit so well that you, as our clients, can focus on doing your bits in peace and don't need to spend sleepless nights worrying about how your people will get paid. Now, with that, I think for us, the real challenge that comes up now, if you go to the next slide, is, I guess, how to keep. Sorry, one more back. So how to keep our people going, I guess. So, if we come back to our fundamental values and we say, look, let's keep our people first, because they're the ones that keep the wheels spinning and the engine operating in our business. What can we do to make sure that they keep motivated, especially in these types of situations where, you think you've gotten past the worst part of this, and then, you need to return to a lockdown and situations like this. Just sharing a little bit of tips, which you can obviously find on our LinkedIn stream as well. So we've done, various theme days. We did pub quiz, we've gone superhero day, we've playlists on Spotify that people collaborate in putting together. We've got mindful Mondays, where we do sort of meditation together. You can join in if you've got time, and for kids, other kids. So we try as much as possible to just make sure that people have a bit of fun, whilst the times are actually quite, I think, mentally challenging oftentimes. So I guess I don't really have the Rosetta Stone to that, but I think we will have to try. I think that's the ultimate solution. So I think that's, from our point of view, the experience so far, and I think it ain't over yet. So let's see what else we can still learn. It's definitely been educational so far. I think, Neil, maybe that's me handing over to you then as a next slide, say, look, what is it that ultimately, and coming from it slightly biased as we are, but what would you say we should be, organizations should look for in a vendor?
Yeah. Thanks, Ina. And I just support everything you say about sort of keeping connection with the employee base. For all of us on the call, it is absolutely critical in this time, and we're all learning as we go, and I think we're all getting better at it, but it's a never-ending challenge to just keep that connectivity with our staff going. We've listed a number of points here, and sort of reflecting on this slide, it's very apparent to me that one of these stands out above all else, and that's having the right partnership. If I look at the other considerations for people on the call to think about if they're looking to outsource, be it payroll or anything else, clearly there's it's the price of admission. We will manage your payroll accurately in a timely manner, that's nothing less than would be expected from our clients. We of course have good plans in place for BCP. We believe, although we were running, as was everybody else, to catch up with what was a very rapidly evolving situation, we have not missed a payroll. We have, performed, I would say, exceptionally well during this very difficult time. Managing very complex payrolls, we spoke about that earlier on. Yes, it's an evolving and it's a critical, mission critical thing for organisations to do, and it does need to be done accurately. Once again, the expectation of our clients is that we will manage all edge cases, not simply the day-to-day payroll, but all the challenges that come on those edge cases that we will do as well. Having flexibility to scale up and down. Our systems are incredibly robust. They've been in the market for a long time. Our service centres have been in operation for a long time. We can grow and flex with our clients as they grow as well. Certainly, we have a great stable of very satisfied clients. We're able to have prospects, get client testimonials and so forth. But if I wrap all that up, what's the defining difference? And it's a cultural fit as well. Organisations need to have absolute trust in their payroll provider. And that comes with time as we go through the learnings of each individual client. Ina mentioned a little earlier that, whilst organisations become more global, at the end of the day, payroll is local. It's very local, and as we mentioned in APAC, it's a very diverse set of local regulations that have to apply. And certainly, there are nuances on each individual local payroll system, and we need to be able to manage that. But again, it's people to people. Our payroll people are talking to our clients daily. They build relationships, and indeed, some of the best testimonials we have for clients who draw out specific payroll executives under the Ascender banner, saying that how they deal on a day-to-day basis with those people. One further thing I'd add on that, we obviously survey our clients on a regular basis. And one of the things that shines out when we do these surveys is responsiveness. I think if you're looking for an outsourced provider, you want that level of responsiveness. The outsourced provider is there to serve the client. If the client has an issue, the worst thing that they can have is no response. And I think we certainly pride ourselves on being very responsive to our clients' needs in a very timely manner. So maybe if we just flick to the next slide. It's a little bit of the selling job at the end of the presentation. But if I look at sort of the value proposition that we provide at Ascender, certainly we said right at the outset, APAC is our back garden. This is where we play. We are the leader in the region. We've been in the Asia-Pac region for 30 years or more. And I think some of the Asian platforms date back to 30 years or more. So we're very well entrenched in this region. We mentioned before that the platforms are Ascender owned and developed, so we have control over that end-to-end technology offering, and obviously our services are based on that proprietary technology. We have a broad service centre footprint, and I think if we look at having key people in place, we have redundancy in the system. If you're in an organisation with one payroll person, that's a key risk in an organisation. We have service centres across the region, and there's significant weight of employees in each of those service centres, and that's quite a unique capability across the regions or the countries that we've noted there. In everything we do, information security, compliance and privacy are absolutely critical. I mentioned before, they're the price of admission. Our systems are audited externally every year. We have those processes in place where we can guarantee that security, compliance and privacy. And I think the other thing that we haven't touched on to any great degree in this particular webinar is our ecosystem of partnerships. We integrate with the leading HCM software providers across the globe. We have great relationships with them. We work in a very collaborative sense with them. So to the extent that you're relying on for core HR, other systems, we integrate seamlessly into those other systems. And as I said, we have a long history of work with them. And then just finally, if we can go to the next slide, just really recapping all of that and putting it into our vision. And it really is to be your trusted partner in the Asia Pacific. As Ina said at the outset, we're not looking to play outside that area. It's big enough for us, and we want to be your trusted partner. So with that, I might hand over to question time.
Thank you, Ina and Neil. We will now open up the floor for any questions. Yep, there's one question. So the question is, how can payroll outsourcing impact my cost saving? Is there really a business case for it?
I feel like this is a question for Neil for sure, but let me just start with saying that I feel quite strongly that there should be another reason on top of cost savings that you embark on this journey. So I guess maybe just talking about the relationship, like if you just look at costs, you're going to be in this as a true partnership because there's no other way to do this properly. So, you know, maybe look for those other benefits as well and make sure that you've got a business case that stacks up. Neil, hope I didn't steal your thunder completely. I just wanted to put that in there.
No, look, certainly from my perspective, I certainly appreciate that organisations are looking for cost benefit when they outsource. It's impossible to set a framework that says here's a saving that people will achieve by outsourcing payroll. It will vary depending on each organisation's circumstances. I would say, however, it is absolutely key to look at the overall cost. It's not simply saying, well, I'm moving this person in and that person, are they at a cheaper rate, or this system and that system. You have to look at the whole cost of ownership of payroll when building the business case. And certainly we have teams of people who can assist clients or prospective clients in helping to build those business cases, because as Ina mentioned, yes, there's an economic imperative here, but there's also this partnership, there's this risk management, compliance, security, all the other aspects of outsourcing, which we believe provide significant benefits to an organisation.
All right, I think we have another question from Cindy. Does your company has hiring and secondment services?
No, that's not part of the actual portfolio of Ascender. We can sort of refer you if there's someone you're looking for. So just the hiring and secondment business is not a business that we're in, unfortunately. I hope I got the question right.
I would say we have a small part of our business in Australia only that does that. But
sorry, to be fair, yeah.
in the broader APAC, no, we don't.
This question is for Ina, right? As a general manager who manages multi-country, what does consolidation of the payroll function means to the organization?
Look, I think there's typically there's simplicity. So there's that always there's always that whole one throat to choke thinking behind when organizations do something like that. So it's about not needing to manage 23 different contracts and partners and services and languages. So, you know, one vendor says this is called A and another one says this is called B. So to me, really, it is about that. So I think all the rest, so you'll probably have efficiencies, you'll probably have cost savings, you'll probably have all kinds of benefits around data consolidation and better transparency. But to me, it's about the simplicity of forming a relationship with one partner that you can then learn to live with. Because like every relationship, I think everything that you do in a complex world like this, you'll have ups and downs and there'll be mistakes and you'll learn from them and move along. But I think if you don't have the trust to the partner, then you're not going to be successful. And it's quite difficult and time consuming to do this with many, many, many different vendors. So for us, that's really that. For me, I would say that would be my key driver.
Thank you, Ina. I think the next question is more for Neil. from a CFO perspective, what is one thing to look out, when planning on payroll outsourcing?
I think if certainly from my CFO role perspective, I've mentioned obviously partnership time and time again, but I think obviously it's this timeliness, the responsiveness. Where we've got an issue, obviously to a degree we in-house outsource our payroll across the region, but it's having that responsiveness that where there's an issue in the finance function, be it something to do with back-end integration, or indeed looking for different reports to be provided through to the finance team, having that ability to talk to our payroll people. For example, in Australia, we have our payroll managed out of our Manila office, to actually have that ability to raise issues with the payroll team and have them responded to in a very timely fashion is key. Also at the back end, where we're looking to integrate, when we're looking to upgrade systems within the Ascender finance team, having the ability to work with the payroll provider to actually work with you to make that as painless as new systems integrations or implementations can be is also very important.
I don't know if I'm listening like just very gently, but I didn't hear you mention cost savings at all there. Which just goes to show that CFOs aren't all that bad, right?
We have our good days.
All right, I'm just being mindful of time here. Just one last question from the floor. Do you see companies reallocating resources, for example, travel and expenses, to use on payroll outsourcing?
Yeah, I guess that's not necessarily how a balance sheet works, but I'll let Neil maybe.
Yeah, look, I don't think that, I don't see that as the case. I think certainly with Ascender and across the globe, people are not travelling, and so yes, there is a cost saving in relation to that. This is not a case of saying I can save some money here so I can invest it here. I think this is looking at payroll outsourcing. It's a strategic decision about risk management, about employee engagement, and things that are not necessarily economic in nature. Whilst yes, as I said before, there is always an economic element to it. I don't think it's a case of because I can now afford to do it because I'm not spending money on travel that I'll do this. I think that's not the right reason, and we're certainly not seeing that happen. We're seeing people as making the strategic choice that they believe it's non-core to them. They want to hand it over to a trusted partner who has experience in that field. That's the reason it happens.
All right. Thank you, Ina and Neil, for your time, and thank you everyone who has joined us today. If you have any questions and it has not been answered, do email to us at hello@ascenderhcm.com. Else, do look out for the next webinar. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks,
Neil.
everyone.
I heard that. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.